Closing our show this afternoon is Hannah Zwiebel. Hannah is a local and lives in West Hartford, Connecticut. Hannah works in a niche pension market, which is pension risk transfer, and is currently on the administrative side of this business. That whole sentence, I feel like, is so serious and mathy that I find it intimidating. Hannah has 3 young daughters and enjoys hiking, reading, and playing mahjong, though she also said hobbies. Who has time for hobbies? Which I completely feel you on that, Hannah. In response to my question about her favorite place she's ever visited, she decided to take the question in a different direction, thinking more along the lines of the most memorable place she's ever been, and here's what she said. A timely response to go with this theme: it's not necessarily the favorite place I've ever been to, but my favorite travel scene. In high school, I went on a teen tour trip to Poland and Israel. After 10 days in Poland, visiting concentration camps, cemeteries, and what remains of Jewish life in Poland, we boarded a plane late at night and arrived in Israel early the next morning. Instead of going to our hotel, our bus drove to the Te'elat in Jerusalem, which is the promenade, and we watched the sun rise over Jerusalem. The most memorable first view of a city. After seeing the destruction of Poland, to see all the homeland of the Jewish people come alive at dawn was spectacular. To this day, I cannot go to Israel without going back to the same place and seeing the views of the city. It really does sound spectacular. Please welcome Hannah Zwiebel.
When I was 12, I embarked on a journey like many boys and girls before me. I began preparing for my bat mitzvah, and at the heart of my preparations was my father. My dad wasn't going to let the rabbi or the cantor of my synagogue do all the preparations. He wanted to take an active role as well. It might have something to do with the fact that my sister never had a bat mitzvah, so he wanted to make sure he got this one right. Or maybe it was the teacher in him, or maybe it was the strong egalitarian spirit that he had, but he wanted to make sure I was the first girl in our synagogue to read the whole Torah portion. And he also wanted to make sure that I was the first kid in my synagogue who could understand it both in English and in Hebrew. So night after night, we would sit at our kitchen table and we would go back and forth between the English and the Hebrew translation to make sure I knew every single word. And there were nights that we would yell, and there were nights when there would be tears, mostly mine. But time and time again, my dad said to me, you must keep doing this. You must be strong. Education and learning are the most important things. And that would make me think of my dad when he was 12 years old. When my dad was 12 years old, he too should have begun to prepare for his bar mitzvah with his father in that same Jewish rite of passage. But my dad didn't have that luxury. He wasn't living in normal times. My dad was from Nyíregyháza, Hungary, and my dad was 12 years old in June of 1944. He had left the ghetto in his hometown and was hiding with a non-Jewish family outside of Budapest. The last time he saw his father, he said, my grandfather said to him, you know, this is where our family papers and our money is hidden. You must remember where all of this is. And he told him, these are the names and addresses of our family in Hungary and in the United States. You must memorize these names and know exactly where to go. And he also told him about the importance of survival and of learning. Study and learn as much as you can, he said to my father. You must be strong. You must survive. Education and learning are the most important things. When I was 12 and a half, a friend of mine in school broke her leg and was on crutches. It seemed natural for me to try to help her out, so I offered to carry her backpack, which was one less burden for her when she was dealing with being on crutches. It was a very simple thing, and I never thought about it again. In fact, this girl moved away before high school, and it really never, ever crossed my mind again. But years later, we reconnected on Facebook, and she sought me out to say thank you. Something that I had completely forgotten about had stuck with her for so long, and she wanted to take the time to thank me because she never forgot the kindness I shared with her and the help that I gave to her. Even for that short period of time, it made her life that much easier. Sometimes the kindness of a friend can go a long way, and sometimes the kindness and thoughtfulness of new friends can actually save your life. My dad was captured trying to escape into Romania in August of 1944, before he was 12 and a half, and he found himself on a train headed for Auschwitz. When he got there, he was on one of those infamous selection lines when a boy who was of similar age and height as him and probably similar enough appearance approached him and asked if he wanted to pretend to be a twin with this other boy. My dad, hearing that it might save his life, or at least, will lead to not imminent death, and slightly preferred treatments, my dad quickly said yes. And so he and this boy, Mishu, were quickly whisked away to block 10, the medical experimental block. And so for the next 2 weeks, they were poked and prodded. They had daily injections and their daily blood samples taken, but they also had food and shelter. And for that period of time, they were spared from the brutal hard labor that everyone else had to endure. But then one day, Mishu didn't return. My dad heard from other cellmates in Block 10 that Mishu had been killed. My dad assumed that if he did nothing, a similar fate would await him as well. So the next day, when he was taken out of his cell, he excused himself and said he had to use the restroom. And he just simply walked out of Block 10. There were no guards near Block 10, so he just started walking. And he kept on walking until he found Block 26, a nearby block, because the doors were open. And he quickly changed his clothes with the clothes of one of the corpses on the floor, and he took on a new identity. No one from Block 10 came looking for this boy who ran away, or maybe was presumed dead, and no one asked any questions to this new stranger who arrived in Block 26. He simply moved into the shadows and anonymity of the main Auschwitz camp. He will certainly never be able to thank this stranger who became his closest friend, his twin, and perhaps his savior for a few weeks, but he certainly never forgot what he did for my father. After that, my dad blended in and became part of the working camp at Auschwitz, working from sun up to sundown, hardly enough food, horrible living conditions. My dad kept to himself. He'd never wanted to stand out. And soon he became numb to his surroundings. Then one night, it was the middle of October, walking back from work detail, someone started to chant the Kol Nidre melody, the melody from the holiest of prayers on the holiest of days for the Jewish people. My dad could not believe it. Here he was, struggling to put one foot in front of the other. In the midst of all of this horror, my dad could barely survive himself. He was numb to everything else. But here was someone who not only cared enough about religion still, but was human enough and aware enough to know what day it was and to want to celebrate this holiest of days. My dad used to tell me, religion must be felt in your heart. And ever since that time he heard Kol Nidre, my dad has prayed. When he was in Auschwitz, he never thought he would wake up the next morning when he went to sleep. So when he woke up, he would say a prayer, thanking God that he was alive. When he had no one else in the camps with him, when he felt all alone and not really even human, when he had no food or no companionship or anything else, he had God. He had no other explanation for how he survived. So even after the war, my dad continued to pray, thankful first that he survived, and then thankful for everything that he has and all the blessings that he has been given. Every year, when I hear the Kol Nidre melody to symbolize the start of Yom Kippur, I hear that prayer and I think back to my dad and hearing that same prayer with the same melody and the same. I think about the year that he spent listening to Kol Nidre, not in the comforts of his own synagogue, but in a concentration camp. When my dad was 13, he was liberated from Auschwitz and just starting to rebuild his life after the war. When I was 13, I celebrated my bat mitzvah. not just for me, but for the bar mitzvah my dad was never able to have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. You guys, first of all, I'm listening to that whole story and thinking about my own daughter upstairs, who is 12, that'll be 13 in January. And it just, the resilience and I mean, I don't even know how people find themselves in these situations and come up with solutions like that boy and what your dad did. The survival skills are just so amazing and incredible to think about.